Well, good evening, everyone. Michael Soothing here. I thought tonight we'd talk about a non-soothing subject, but we can make it into a relaxing discussion. The subject is giant subduction zone earthquakes and the subsequent tsunami that occurs as a result. The reason this is a concern of mine is that I sit on an area of the northern hemisphere, which is probably going to be the site of the next massive 9.0 plus quake. And right now I'm down close to sea level. I watch the tides come and go out there in the tidal zone that I'm on off of the Umpqua, and we're just a few feet above sea level. So a tsunami, if it occurred, would wipe out my current home, but I'm moving soon to another spot, not because I want to, but because the spot I'm on has a problem with land subsidence, and so I had to find other locations or residence. Anyway, I've got this handy USGS guide called that's the U.S. Geological Service, called Surviving a Tsunami: Lessons from Chile, Hawaii, and Japan. And it's kind of interesting. I have an earthquake and tsunami survival kit. Even at midnight, you can't get by without someone calling. Anyway, where were we? Tsunami Survival Guide. Here's a picture of the aftermath in Hilo, Hawaii. And this is what was left of Hilo. It was pretty much flattened. In 1960, after the tsunami that came from an earthquake in Chile, in South America, thousands of miles away. So that goes to show you how far and how powerful these things can be. The only tsunami I have seen personally was the tsunami in the aftermath of the Japan quake. It came into the Santa Cruz harbor, and it was a few feet high surge, but it was so powerful that it knocked a lot of boats, out of their moorings and did quite a bit of damage, just because the tsunami wave is a very powerful surge that just keeps going and going at high speed, even when it's not very high as far as the overall height. So that wave was only maybe 3 to 4 feet, but that's misleading, because it's not like a 3-foot wave in the surf. A 3-foot wave in the surf is touching someone with your pinky finger, compared to a tsunami 3-foot wave, which is more like getting hit with a massive boulder by comparison as far as force. Anyway, I have ridden out a big quake, not big, a moderately large quake, 7.1 roughly. That was the Loma Prieta quake in the Santa Cruz Mountains that happened in October. What year was that? 1989, I believe. And I was just walking in the front door of my house. Remember, it was World Series week, and we were going to watch the game in Giant Stadium on TV. Just as I was opening the door, the the front door. My son, my Asperger's son Daniel, was small at the time, and I was just bringing him home from daycare. I was a single dad, you know, and everything started shaking and moving, and before I knew it, so I just stayed in the doorway with him instead of going in. The kitchen cupboards were flying open, stuff was coming out, you know, breaking, things were falling over, and yeah, that was just a 7.1. On the Richter scale, each tenth of a point, you know, is a doubling of magnitude, so a 9.0 quake is the kind that would literally throw you several feet in the air if you were standing someplace. I mean, it's that powerful. Be like being launched out of a cannon or something. But anyway, I thought this booklet was pretty interesting, and of course, the first thing it tells you, it has all these lessons from the past and some of the big quakes and tsunamis that have occurred. And what they tell you is, you better rush for high ground if you're down close to sea level and you feel a big quake like that. First, they give you an explanation of the 1960 tsunami from the earthquake in Chile, you know, which happened way down here in South America, but it traveled all over the Pacific, wreaking havoc and doing damage, you know, up to Alaska's Aleutian Islands and over to the Philippines, which happens to be a place I'm very interested in, and Australia and Japan, and, you know, the waves travel outward. What happens is, let me see if I can do this backwards so you understand how it works. There's a continental plates, you know, and they're not stable. And out in the middle of the Pacific, the plates, there's volcanic material coming up in the middle and pushing the plates out, you know. And so all around the continents, there are these fault zones where giant plates of Earth are subducting, or another way to say that is, one is sliding beneath the other one, and they get stuck. So let's say this is the Pacific, this is the North America plate, right? And here's a plate going underneath it like this, but it gets stuck. And so it moves a few inches a year, but it can't go anywhere, so it builds up pressure. And this thing gets more and more pressure built up till suddenly it lets loose like that in a big, massive quake. And when that happens, the seafloor drops suddenly because all that tension is built up and made a bulge for decades or even hundreds of years. Well, when the subducting plate lets loose and the plate above slides like that and the tension's released, the seafloor drops and trillions of tons of water is suddenly displaced from their position, and they start traveling out in waves in both directions. Well, we have a subducting plate like that here off the coast of Oregon. It's called the Juan de Fuca plate, the Cascadia fault zone. They show a little square. It's not very big compared to some of the other fault lines. It's that little square there. If you can see it, I don't know. I'm blocking the light, of course, which makes it harder to see. I should have set this up on the table, and maybe I'll do that and do a better job with it at some point in the future. That's what I'll do. We'll just make this a short video, and then some other time we'll go much deeper into the geology and details of this thing. So anyway, the waves will travel thousands of miles because there's so much water displaced and so much power behind them. The wave they expect, when the Cascadia fault zone lets loose, which it does every 300 to 700 years or less, then we can expect a wave along the coast here that will be anywhere from 20 to 100 feet high, depending on what part of the coast gets inundated. So the home that I just bought, that I'm going to move to, is higher. It's, I think, safe. It's only about 30 feet above sea level, but it's inland enough, I think, and far enough away from all the obstructions and giant sand dunes and things in the way that I don't think the wave would quite inundate the house I'm purchasing. So I'll probably be safe there. This place I'm sitting now, if the quake happened in the next 5 minutes, first of all, it would be so powerful that it would knock this place right off its foundation. And secondly, the tsunami would definitely sweep it away. But we would, because the fault zone is about 60 miles offshore here, we would have a good 15 to 20 minutes from the time of the quake to get to high ground. And high ground is very close by. We could walk to it if necessary. If the roads are all fractured up, which they would be, giant fissures can open in the roads and things, and all the little bridges collapse in a quake that powerful. So you can't set your hopes on driving out. You have to have a backup plan to hoof it. But there's a hill very close by here, easily done in a 5 to 10 minute walk. And I have an earthquake survival kit that has water purifier, dried food, crank radio, and flashlight, tarps, emergency this and emergency that, all kind, bug repellent, you name it, it's in there, all in one canvas bag, so you can just grab it and, in case people get crazy, I have a firearm too. But I don't think they would. The people here would pull together and help each other, I do believe, unlike some areas that have disasters. So, it kind of depends on the local subculture. Anyway, they show you the subduction zone, how one plate's sliding under the other one there, and gets stuck. And see, then this bulge builds up. I'm sitting on the bulge. I'm not talking about my weight right now, or my rear end. I'm sitting on the bulge of my house. And that's the other problem. Not only does the tsunami come in, but when the bulge lets loose and drops, flattens out, the area I'm in is going to drop several feet and stay there. So if high tide right now is about 12 foot below my house, the highest high tides, after the quake, high tide could come right up to the house. So areas will be flooded that didn't used to be. That's the aftermath, when the land drops. So it's kind of scary, but on the other hand, it might not happen for 200 or 300 more years. So the odds are fairly slim. It depends on how you interpret the data. They have a little bar chart here which I won't go into great detail on right now, but it shows the Cascadia Fault Zone. It's a history. And the interesting thing is you'll have big quakes that are concentrated together over about a 200-year span, and then a long gap, that's that white area, and then some more big quakes, and then a long gap. Well, right now, we're in the long gap period. And when that gap ends, we could start having some big quakes again. But the geologists are not necessarily all fully aligned on how long that gap might be. Some say we're overdue because it should be about 300 years, and others say no, it should be about 500 or 600 years, because it depends on whether we're at the leading edge of a swarm or the tail end of a swarm. A swarm being like every 200 or 300 years, then with long periods in between. It's a little hard to interpret the data, but we do know when the last one occurred. There were records of the tsunami in Japan, written records, and then there was, the way they calculate it here is by looking at sediment layers that they take out in the ocean off the continental shelf. When one of these giant quakes occurs, there's a big collapse of and it leaves a big layer. That's one way they know. And another way they know is the resulting tsunami washes a big thick layer of sand inshore and leaves it, and then topsoil buries that sand. So it's a little bit like interpreting tree rings. They can go back by taking big long core samples down and see how far down these things are, and then tell how long ago they were. Anyway, it says here, many will survive the earthquake. A lot of people think, why should I worry about the tsunami? The earthquake would probably kill me anyway. But that's not true, because even a giant earthquake, if you're not right on the fault zone, or if you're not in a big brick or stone building, or not right under a cliff or something that's going to collapse, you're not going to be killed by the earthquake. It's just ground movement. So even my house here, though it would fall off its foundation, it's a wood frame house, and it would probably stay intact as far as the frame. So I would just be in a big box that's jumping around, but it wouldn't collapse. There's no heavy things above me that are going to come down and kill me, you know. So there's 2x4s and stuff, but you know, you dive under the table or something, you're fine. So, you know, or onto your soft couch, you know. Then if a couple 2x4s come down, they'll land on the couch back and not get you. I know that sounds a little hokey, but okay. You could pull the couch down on top of you and it would protect you. There are techniques like that that could actually work to save you from, say, a roof collapse. It says, you know, don't wait to head to high ground, but also don't assume when the tsunami comes in, if you see the wave come in or you know it's come in and gone out again, don't assume that you're now safe to go back down to low ground, because the waves continue for hours in some cases. They're paced a couple 100 miles apart. These are giant waves. You wouldn't even see them out in the ocean because they're big, low, flat things with massive amounts of water traveling across the ocean, you know. a couple 100 miles an hour or faster. And but they don't build up until they get close to shore, where the land, slopes up. That's when they start to climb and get really big. Out in the ocean, you'd barely notice if you were on a ship and a tsunami passed under you. All you would notice is that the horizon kind of lifted for maybe a minute or two or three, and then slowly started dropping again, the water underneath you. You wouldn't see a giant wave like in stupid movies like the Poseidon Adventure, It's not like that. The big surge comes later. I sure am yakking a lot when I should be showing you this magazine. I'm going to do a more in-depth analysis of this for you in a future video, but this shows on Hawaii, some guys were measuring the waves, and it shows that there were several of them. The first one started just after midnight. This one, and that one was about 5 feet in height. But they're very powerful, so it still wiped things out. The next wave came about 12:45 a.m. So it was about a half hour later, and it was bigger. But the biggest one came about 5 minutes after 1 a.m. This one was 14 feet high, whereas the first wave was only 4 feet high. So there's the biggest one, see? And then there were several more that came after that over the next hour and a half, roughly. So that was from the quake in Chile, and altogether there were, how many waves came in? Let's count them together. There was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 waves altogether. 8 big tsunami waves over a roughly a little over 2 hour period. So you never want to assume that, you're safe because a couple of waves have come and gone. This is kind of eerie. The town clock at Waiakea, a Hilo suburb, stopped at 1:04 a.m. when the biggest wave of the Chilean tsunami struck Hawaii. The clock, still showing that time, now stands as a monument to the tsunami. There's the clock sitting in the debris, and then here they put it up as a monument, still showing that time when the biggest wave hit. Wouldn't it be scary to have the tsunami happen in the middle of the night? I think that would be pretty frightening. They show, they say, head for high ground and stay there. That's what they say. And they show a series of photos with all the people on high ground watching as the wave inundates the village, In the big quake that happened, what was the name of that one that happened not very long ago? And Aceh, A-C-E-H, Bande Aceh, is that it? The Indian Ocean. Anyway, in that big quake and tsunami, the water receded, as it often does before a tsunami. The water goes out. There's a big surge of the ocean leaving and going away from shore. Very eerie. And people who don't understand tsunamis don't realize that's when you're in the most danger. And so people go out and start picking up shells and fish and crabs and things. Meanwhile, a giant wall of water is rushing to engulf them. So, if you see the water go out like that, run for high ground, fast like a bunny, okay? Fast like Pinky the Bunny, all right? And jump to high ground. Don't count on road. About belongings. I'm going to read you this story in my next video about this. A guy who should not have gone back to get his valuables. You know where that's going, right? Climb a tree. I know it sounds hokey, but a lot of people save their lives that way. In previous quakes, go to an upper floor or roof of a building, but that would have to be a very strong building they're talking about. You know, the kind that's built with steel girders and concrete, you know, that kind of building. Not something flimsy. If the tsunami does get you, climb onto something that floats, it says. If you can find a good piece of debris to hop onto, that might save your life. Expect the waves to leave debris. Well, yes, quite obviously. Expect the quake to lower the coastal land, like I was telling you earlier. Along the coast here, we have some forests, kind of petrified forests that are down in the sand, now down below sea level, where the trees died from salt water because the land dropped in the last big quake of 1700. So the same thing will happen again further inland this next time. I still have a little bit of ice left. And it's much needed because my voice. Okay, I think we've discussed this long enough for now, but I'll do another video in the future where I have this set up properly on the table and maybe some other visual aids so that we can talk about earthquakes and the geology and how it happens and what to expect in the future. Yeah, one of the scariest things about the Loma Prieta quake that I wrote out with my son is that the quake is pretty powerful, but you know what's happening at first. It's kind of exciting, like a ride at Disneyland. But then what happens is, over the next few months, the quake disrupts your life really badly. We had no power for 3 weeks or something. You know, there were all kinds of problems. Fire started, you know, all that kind of thing, from broken gas lines and stuff. So it becomes a bit traumatic. It ruined my house too. It messed it all up. And I dealt with the aftermath for many years of repairs. But what happens over the next few months is you get these big aftershocks that are, say, 6.0, 5.0, 4.5, and they hit maybe in the middle of the night, like 2 a.m. sometimes, and you awaken with a jolt of adrenaline like you wouldn't believe. And even though those aftershocks are much smaller than the original earthquake, they're much more frightening because now you have the built-in flight or fight response that just pulses you with a burst of adrenaline and energy, and you think you're in danger because you've been left kind of traumatized by the first big quake. So those are quite uncomfortable, the aftershocks. And by the way, the Loma Prieta quake, I remember very, very distinctly. We had some pretty good warning in advance, because in June of that year, we had a big, sharp foreshock, and in August of that year, we had another bigger foreshock, and so we had quite a bit of warning. If I see big foreshocks like that on the Cascadia fault zone, then I know the big one might be coming. But, so if I get washed away, you'll know where I went. Anyway, between now and then, don't ASMR and drive, anybody. Take care, and we'll be back.